in a quiet rural American town where gravel roads cut through fields of corn and weathered barns leaned into the wind, there lived a woman named Layla. She carried herself with a quiet dignity, the kind people noticed only after she'd left the room. Her husband, Adam, was a farmer shaped by hard seasons, a square jaw, rough hands, and a temper that often arrived before his better judgment. The years ticked by with the regular rhythm of planting and harvest, and still there was no child. Silence settled between them, filling the spaces where laughter was meant to live. Then, one winter night, after years of whispered prayers and unspoken longing, Layla gave birth to a son. She named him Ben. When she pressed him to her chest, joy broke open inside her like dawn pouring through a storm. But when Adam saw the baby, his joy froze into suspicion. Ben's skin was darker than Adam's, his curls tight and springing, his eyes large and deep features that told a story Adam refused to hear. "This can't be my son," he said, stepping back as if truth itself had taken shape and threatened him. "Whose child is this?" Layla. Tears burned Layla's eyes. "He is yours," she said. "I swear on everything I hold sacred, he is your son." But Adam's pride had already chosen its verdict, and the town had already begun to whisper. Curtains twitched as neighbors invented motives and histories. Shame stacked like wood for a bonfire. That night, anger pushed Adam to the door, and fear kept their neighbors on their porches, silent witnesses to a cruelty they would later pretend not to remember. He forced Layla out into the cold, with her newborn in her arms barefoot, bleeding, the night wind clawing at her shawl. She walked toward the mountains with nothing but the child and a heart too strong to break in public. Somewhere near the tree line, she found an abandoned cabin, her roof, wet floor, and a dry corner that felt like a miracle. She wrapped Ben in her shawl, kissed his brow, and whispered, "We will live. From tonight, we begin again." The cabin shook in the wind. The moon pulled thin over black branches, and a woman cast out by her husband and judged by her neighbors looked at the life in her arms and decided the story wasn't over. It was only beginning. Morning brought a kind of clarity sadness never could. The cabin was barely standing, yet it was shelter. Layla took stock: a cracked window, a leaning door, a rusted stove, and the relentless need to feed a child. She learned the mountain the way hungry people learn hope, by paying attention. She dug for roots that boiled into bitter broth. She stripped bark into tea that soothed the chest. She gathered berries, cautious and deliberate, teaching herself which nourished and which punished. At night, she held Ben beneath her shawl and hummed a melody older than apology. When food ran short, Layla walked to a neighboring town where no one knew her face. She mended clothes, tended cuts, soothed children's coughs with poultices her grandmother had taught her to make. She asked for little: a loaf of bread, a jar of milk, a pair of shoes a size too big for a boy who would one day grow into them. She offered her name to no one. To strangers, she was only the woman on the mountain. Ben grew. He chased light between trees, stacked stones near the creek, and spoke to birds like they were cousins. At night, Layla taught him letters by scratching charcoal across turned-over planks. She taught him to pray without instructing him whom to blame. She taught him that the world will try to measure him by his skin long before it measures him by his deeds, and that he must never accept those terms. "Your worth," she told him, "doesn't come from faces in windows. It comes from what you do when no one's clapping." By 12, Ben had shoulders built by hills and a gentleness forged by watching his mother choose dignity over bitterness. The cabin transformed under Layla's hands: patched roof, reinforced beams, a stove that breathed heat instead of smoke. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. In the nearby towns, rumors traveled more honestly than people. They said a boy from the mountain had cooled a fever with nothing but leaves and patience. They said his voice calmed pain. Some called him blessed. Some called him strange. But even doubt must yield to results, and the results kept walking home. One evening, by the fire's glow, Ben asked a question that had learned to live in silence. "Why don't we live among them? Why do we stay hidden?" Layla threaded a needle, her hands steady. "Because they weren't ready for us," she said. "But they'll learn. People always do, slowly. Ben nodded like a boy who was already part man. Then I'll wait, and when it's time, I'll show them who we really are. Layla smiled through tears she didn't let fall. The woman cast out into the cold was raising not a victim but a vision. By 18, Ben walked the forest as if each tree had once sat at his kitchen table. He knew where the good water came to the surface, which blossoms hid medicine inside beauty, which roots asked for patience before giving up their strength. He kept a leather bag at his side, hand-stitched by Layla, and in it he carried small jars, folded cloth, a stone for grinding, twine, and faith. People began to come to him, not as curiosities, but as pilgrims. A mother arrived with a child who coughed until dawn. Ben listened to the lungs with his ear against the back, watched the color of lips, pressed gently along the ribs. He brewed bark and honey, taught breathing like prayer, and returned at sunrise to check again. Within days, color returned to the child's cheeks. A farmhand came after a fall from a wagon, left his wrist twisted and impossible. Ben wrapped warm compresses, bound the bones in soft splints, and showed the man how to move pain without angering it. When the hand gripped again, the man cried not for the pain but for the proof. The stories multiplied. The mountain boy knows things the doctors forget, and remembers things the land hasn't told most people. Gratitude traveled quickly. Suspicion traveled quicker. Who licensed him? Some asked. What if it's a trick? Others worried. But the question that mattered most kept answering itself in living rooms and back porches across the valley. Are our people getting better? They were. Ben took little for the work. If someone insisted on paying, he said, then pay forward. When you see someone stranded on the roadside, stop. If you see someone hungry, share. If you see someone being judged the way you once judged my mother, step in and change the ending. Children followed him as if kindness were magnetic. One brave boy finally asked, "Are you a magician?" Ben grinned. "No, I'm my mother's son." The children came back the next day and the next. Not for spells, but for stories about leaves that heal and patience that saves. Layla watched from the doorway as her son grew into the kind of man people listen to, even when he whispers. But in the town that had thrown her out, a bad season became a worse one. Rain came late and left early. Wells turned shallow. And then, as if the earth had coordinated with the air, an illness began to slip from door to door. It favored children. It stole nights and appetites. It frightened even those who didn't believe in fear. When panic crested, a figure appeared at the edge of town, a tall man with a steady walk, a well-worn bag, and a past that belonged to everyone there, whether they admitted it or not. He lifted his hand to knock on the first door, and fate opened it from the inside. "Please," he said, "let me see your child." The house smelled of fever and damp cloth. A boy lay on the bed, shimmering with heat, each breath a decision. His mother's hands shook. His father stood like a dam built of pride, knowing it wouldn't hold. Ben moved quietly cool water, crushed leaves, a cloth folded just so, and placed across the brow. He lifted the boy gently, spoke in a voice only the boy and Mercy could hear, then waited with the family as the room counted heartbeats. Eventually, the shiver loosened its grip. The boy's breath slowed into something human again, and his eyelids fluttered to reveal eyes that recognized love instead of pain. The mother cried in heaves. The father sat down hard as if honesty had finally weighed enough to seat him. By the time Ben stepped back into the square, word had traveled faster than feet. A crowd gathered hungry for answers, terrified of what those answers would demand. "Who are you?" someone asked. "What's your name?" Another pressed. Ben looked out, over faces he had known as shadows from a distance, the way one recognizes a place only by its outlines. He raised his chin, not in pride but in clarity. "My name is Ben," he said. "I am Layla's son." Silence moved through the crowd like weather. The name cracked, something ancient guilt thawed. Memory burned. People glanced at the old farmhouse at the edge of town, at one another, at the ground. It was as if time folded and forced them to look at their own reflection. Ben did not punish them with his gaze. He went to the next house, and the next. A girl whose fever sang too loudly. A neighbor who had run out of hope mid-sentence. A grandmother who prayed with lips and lungs that argued. Ben did what he always did. Mixed, placed, waited, returned. He worked in daylight and an early blue hour, and when exhaustion bent his back, gratitude straightened it again. People began to follow him, not as watchers, but as hands carrying water, fetching cloth, keeping lanterns steady. A sheriff who once let rumors do his job now stood on porches, asking strangers to be quiet so the healer could think. An old woman who had laughed at Layla's shame now pressed cool apples into Ben's palm and said nothing, because nothing could yet be enough. The town, starved of humility, learned to chew it in small bites. And as they learned, the same question kept circling like a hawk above a field. What about Adam? Even redemption has an address. Ben found his at the end of a dirt lane where the grass grew high against a fence that needed mending. The farmhouse sagged in a tired posture, shingles missing like teeth. He knocked 3 times an old rhythm for new courage. The door opened slowly. Adam stood behind it, aged into someone a younger version of himself might not have recognized. Pride had fled. Regret had stayed. His eyes scanned Ben's face the way a map searches for roads it pretended not to know. Knees, when asked to hold that much truth, failed him. He sank onto the threshold, as if gravity had finally made its case. "You're my son," he said, the words cracking open the air. "God help me, you're my son. And I chose the town's voice over my wife's, a lie over a life. I did that. I threw you both into the night." Ben didn't rush to pick him up. Some things have to be said from the ground. "Forgiveness," Ben answered softly, "isn't mine to give first. The one you wronged most was my mother. If she can forgive you, then perhaps there's something left for me to do, besides heal strangers." Adam's shoulders shook. "I will beg her forgiveness," he said. "I will crawl to that mountain if I have to." "Walk," Ben said, "and look her in the eye." The town had gathered at a distance, keeping space between curiosity and respect. They expected thunder, maybe lightning vengeance with spectacle. What they got instead was a quiet that cut deeper. A son refusing revenge, not because he was weak, but because he was strong enough to live without it. That night, Ben returned to the cabin. Layla was sorting herbs on a cloth, each leaf placed like a word she refused to waste. "I saw him," Ben said. Layla's hands paused. She didn't ask for details. She asked a better question. "And what did you see that you didn't expect?" "A broken man," Ben said. "A man more haunted than hateful. I thought I'd feel rage. I felt sorrow." Layla nodded once, the kind of nod that forgives a boy for becoming a man in front of his mother. "Regret," she said, "is a sentence without a release date." 2 mornings later, the town woke to a sight it never planned to deserve. Layla walking down Main Street in a simple dress, a shawl pinned at her shoulder, her steps measured and unafraid. People froze. Some removed their hats without thinking. Others pressed lips to knuckles and wept for earthquakes that shake years late. She didn't hurry. Dignity doesn't run. She stopped where she had once been judged, in front of the old brick well, and turned as if the town itself were a person she needed to face. Adam, pale and trembling, approached from the far end of the street. Every step looked like a confession. When he reached her, he couldn't lift his head. "Layla," he said, barely more than breath, "I wronged you. I believed what I wanted to believe, because it fit the story in my head. I called you liar. I called you less than you are. I threw you into the night. If there is anything left of me that is worth keeping, it will only be because you chose to forgive what cannot be undone." Layla didn't rush to answer. She let silence do its work. Then she stepped forward and gently, almost maternally, placed the back of her hand against his fevered brow. From her bag, she dabbed a few drops of the same tonic Ben used, not because it would cure regret, but because tenderness sometimes needs a sign. "I forgive you," she said at last. Gasps moved through the crowd like wind in wheat. "Not because you earned it. You didn't. But because I refuse to keep a house for bitterness inside my chest. What you broke can never be unbroken. But I will not drink poison, hoping you will feel it." Adam's face crumpled. He nodded through tears that seemed surprised to find themselves allowed. Layla turned to the town. You stood at your windows and watched a woman be thrown into winter with a child in her arms, she said, voice steady. You did not speak. You passed sentence with your silence. But mercy is not a story we tell because it flatters us. It is a contract we sign with how we live after we've been wrong. An older woman stepped forward, hands shaking. We were cruel, she said. We were small. We are sorry. Others added their apologies. Some stammered, some strong. Not performative, not perfect, just necessary. Ben stood a few paces behind his mother, taller than any shame aimed his way. A man who had learned to redirect pain into something the world could breathe. He didn't bask. He watched. He listened. He prepared for the work that still waited at the edges of town, where illness had not yet been convinced to leave. By evening, Layla and Ben returned house to house, together mother and son, remedy and reassurance, in kitchens and porches and bedrooms where fear had moved in and locked the door. They made a different case, and slowly, the town's fever broke. Months later, the fields remembered how to be green. The well's bucket pulled up water that looked like forgiveness. Kids ran where they had once been carried. The town, which used to hold its breath whenever truth approached, learned to exhale even when it hurt. Ben took to sitting beneath a large sycamore near the church, a place where people came not just to be healed, but to be taught. He spoke about leaves and bones, yes, but more often, he spoke about what one person's dignity does to a room. He kept a box of stones for children to stack, reminding them that balance is not the same as stillness. He showed them that strong hands can be gentle, and that gentle hands can be strong enough to move a life. Layla returned to her market errands and mountain walks. People greeted her with respect, so earnest it made them shy. She accepted kindness without collecting debts. When someone thanked her for forgiving what seemed unforgivable, she smiled in a way that suggested the conversation was bigger than both of them. I didn't forgive to fix him, she would say. I forgave to free me. Adam worked quietly on his land. He repaired fences one post at a time. A man finally accustomed to the sound of his own apology. He did not ask for a seat at anyone's table. He brought bread and left it at doors. He showed up where work needed doing and did not sign his name to it. When he passed Layla in town, he removed his hat and lowered his eyes, not in cowardice, but in respect. She returned the gesture with a nod that said, "We can be better people than we were." The town changed slowly, imperfectly, but undeniably. When gossip arose, someone asked, "Is this our business?" When judgment knocked, someone opened the door and said, "Not today." When a stranger arrived, people reached for welcome before they reached for rumor. It wasn't a miracle, it was practice. One evening, as the sun lowered itself gently across the roofs, Ben finished teaching a small group of children how to bind a sprain and when to rest. A little girl lingered. "Is it true," she asked, "that some people will always hate what they don't understand?" Ben thought about the question the way he thought about a fever. You don't defeat it by pretending it's not hot. Some will, he said, but the better truth is that understanding can be taught. That's our work, all of us. The girl nodded and ran off, lighter than when she'd arrived. Later, Ben walked his mother home along the path that had once been their exile and had become their return. Fireflies stitched light between grass blades. The cabin repaired, expanded, alive glowed, like a memory allowed to stay, but not to rule. "Do you ever wish," Layla asked, "that our story had been easier?" Ben smiled, the way men do when they've learned a lesson through living. Not lecture. Easier, maybe, but not better. Hard doesn't mean hopeless. Look at them now. They stood a while in the hush that belongs to places that have known both cruelty and mercy. Finally, Layla touched her son's arm. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" he asked. "For being the kind of man who could have broken the town and instead decided to heal it." Ben looked back toward the lights, toward porches where voices rose and fell, toward streets that now knew the difference between quiet and silence. "It wasn't just me," he said. "It was you first." They went inside. The door closed. The night, once an enemy, stood watch like a friend. If this story moved you, like the video, to help it reach more people, tell us in the comments, what does forgiveness mean to you? and subscribe for more powerful, life-changing stories every week.